Tom tugged on the cow's udders, and milk sprayed into the old bucket.
"It's a day's ride. No more than that, really,"
Tom said, spitting a soggy mouthful of tobacco on the floor of the barn. "And you're sure you haven't heard of any highwaymen in the area? No robberies or muggings?" Kargin said, shifting the belt on his hip.
"Sorry, no."
Kargin thought of the snow falling outside of the barn. The bad weather hit and had relentlessly fallen for days. If he didn't leave for Alamir when he did, chances are his horse, or worse, Kargin himself would have died while crossing the frigid tundra of the Tomath kingdom. Being a meal for snow wolves wasn't his idea of finding honor. A bodyguard position on a boat wasn't what he was expecting either, and doing so during a storm was less appealing. Still, the Squire Prince was out of money. As the prince, he could make various demands of peasants to afford him whatever he needed, even if it went against the knighthood code. However, famine in Tomath lands had struck most families hard enough that there wasn't much to offer a knight, or in this case, a squire. A bodyguard position to earn money would have to suffice. Kargin found a fence to lean against in the stable while he slipped his yak leather gloves off, trying to blow hot air on his hands. Lifting the bucket of milk from underneath the cow, Tom stood up. Grateful to be out of the storm, Kargin knew he owed Tom his life. Had it not been for the farmer, Kargin would have died. Tom was short and frail and balding. The dark rings under his eyes were a lifetime of hard work rather than lack of sleep. He wore a tunic with a wool jacket and overalls. Carrying the bucket of milk to a small shelf where a rat scurried away from, Tom grabbed a shovel and began working manure into a pile. Feeling for his coin purse hanging from his belt, the Squire Prince heard the jingle of 2 lonely copper pieces clinking together. He frowned. Spending his traveling money on whores and whiskey had been fun, but it was a bad idea that he now regretted. The burning sensation when he pissed didn't help matters either.
"You hungry?"
Tom asked, stabbing the shovel into the pile. "I suppose I am. What is your wife cooking?"
"Mushroom pie. Ain't too bad as long as you pick off the green parts,"
Tom said, continuing to shovel manure. Kargin wasn't sure if he wanted mushroom pie or not. It sounded terrible, but Kargin was hungry and hadn't eaten in hours. Finishing up and heading out of the barn, Tom braved the cold and went to the house. Kargin followed. The inside of the small house was cramped. Kargin met Tom's wife, Catherine, and sat at the table eyeing the wooden bowl full of mushroom pie. He wondered if his eyes were playing tricks or if he saw part of it slightly move. He then shifted his gaze from his dish and eyed Catherine as she bent over to put another pie in the oven.
"This one is raccoon,"
she said, shutting the wood stove door. "Oh?" Kargin said, not paying attention to her words and continuing to eye her figure. She was a beautiful woman despite the dirt and grime.
So my boy here thought maybe he could come with,"
Tom said, with a mouthful of mushroom pie and noticing Kargin staring. He hoped to take the prince's mind off of Catherine. Tom didn't know who he had been rescuing from the storm, but as soon as he did, he wished he hadn't. He knew who Kargin was and knew the prince's reputation. Tom knew that as prince, everything in the Tomath lands was Kargin's right to lay claim to. Everything.
"I'm really good at boating,"
a small boy, Tom's only son, said with a large and proud crooked-teeth smile. Kargin went back to staring at Catherine again.
"So, can I go?"
"Eh?" Kargin said, his attention being pulled back to the conversation at hand. No, I don't think so. Your father says that there have been goblin raids against the people here in your village recently. If it's that dangerous, and being on that boat is no place for a child."
"But I'm really good in a fight. I am. Me and Gregory, the McMillan boy from down the way, we got into a tumble a few days ago, and I bopped his nose buck good. You should have seen him," the boy said, bouncing up and down in his seat.
Turning from the boy, Kargin went back to staring at Catherine.
"Something interest you?"
Tom said, wishing he had never gone out in the storm and found Kargin. "Yes." Kargin woke the next morning. The blizzard had come in stronger, and he was forced to stay the night at Tom's farm. Catherine lay next to Kargin in the bed, blankets pulled tightly around her form as she slept. Kargin sat up out of the bed and began to put his clothes on. Leaving Catherine in the bedroom, Kargin walked into the common area of the home. The living quarters and kitchen were one room. Asleep on the bench by the table, Tom's son snored. The fish farmer was cooking what few eggs the family had left in their supply.
"Hungry?"
Tom said with no emotion. "Yes, very much. Kargin said, sitting at the table. Tom set the wooden plate of eggs down in front of Kargin, along with his family's last piece of toasted rye bread and milk that smelled a few days old. No one spoke for a moment. All that could be heard was the wind howling outside. Tom broke the uncomfortable silence.
"We need to leave soon before the boy wakes,"
he said, hoping the conversation piece would distract him from his thoughts of what the prince expected of Catherine the night before. "Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. So, you're sure you haven't heard of any highwaymen robbing people?"
"No,"
Tom said, glancing at the door of the bedroom. Catching Tom's glance, Kargin grew uncomfortable. "Yes, we should get moving." The sinking Kargin choked out under the deadly and icy water of the river. He grasped and flailed at his helmet as it sunk away to the bottom. His father would have a fit over the family heirloom being lost. His hand touched a rope. A rope! The rope was his only hope, his only chance. The Squire Prince grasped the hemp lifeline and pulled hard. Kargin resurfaced to being drowned down the river and saw the goblins on the small fishing caravel assaulting Tom. The boat wasn't made for an ambush, and the squire knew it. Listing from left to right, causing a few of the barrels of catfish to spill on the deck, the expedition with Tom had gone horribly wrong. 5 of them had descended from trees that canopied the river.
"Gold! Gold!"
one of the goblins screamed, drawing a dagger across Tom's right ear where it met his head. Nuisances, thieves, and terrors, goblins were the annoying beings that caused farmers and travelers no end of trouble in the Tomath lands. Every adventurer knew of the creature, and it was well known as the dragon, if not as epic. Most goblins lived in communities in the wilds where they teamed together to rob or mug travelers. Often goblins were seen as weak, more annoying than actually dangerous. However, goblins would and could kill, given the chance. The hideous and ugly beings sported skin that was bumpy, rough, and ranged in color from green to brown to sickly shades of yellow. Most of the goblins were shorter than Tom, only standing about 4 feet tall.
"Oh, please, please, it's in the fishes! The fishes!"
the farmer screamed in pain. The pitter-patter of blood hit the wooden deck on the boat. Tom grasped at where his ear had once been and knew he wouldn't live long enough to get the boat to Alamir proper. The goblins rushed to the barrels of catfish. One of the goblins drew his dagger and sliced open the belly of a large and fat catfish. Gold coins and blood poured onto the deck of the boat. Tom scurried to the other side of the caravel, wondering if the icy river would be a better death than the one the goblins had planned. The other 4 goblins began grabbing catfish from barrels and slicing them open, crowding the deck with more gold and more grime and more fish gore. Kargin pulled the hemp rope trailing behind the caravel as it made its way down the Gemaroth River. He hated that people called it that. It was the name of the river, but the people had taken to calling the town side that lay outside of the keep Gemaroth, rather than its proper name, Tomath Keep. Kargin cursed the people that winter. He cursed their poverty, their squalor, and their desperation. He vowed that if he lived long enough to one day be king, he would change the name of the river. Then no one would call the townside Gemaroth again. Perhaps he would expand the keep's walls. The land and homes, shops and farms, everything belonged to the Tomath family. Kargin felt himself slip and grasped the rope tighter. If he didn't do something, the caravel would eventually go out to the ocean, where surely an entire goblin pirate crew waited. He pulled on the rope, moving closer and closer to the boat, and saw the scene on board. Finally, he made it back up onto the deck of the fishing boat.
"Alive! Alive!"
a goblin yelled, pointing at a soaked and freezing Kargin who rolled onto the deck. 2 goblins rushed him. Kargin had never been in a fight in his life other than wrestling and training with other squires. The snow wolves the night before was the first time in his life Kargin had ever truly been threatened. One of the goblins swung a dagger in a wide arc at Kargin's throat. He ducked, but when he stood back up, he cracked his unprotected head on the bottom of the chin of the goblin, knocking the green-skinned creature into the catfish barrels. Kargin stumbled, and another goblin dove at him, but Kargin moved to the side, trying to remember his fighting technique. The foolish goblin tumbled overboard and into the water. 4 remaining goblins concentrated on Kargin. Tom grabbed an oar, trying to ignore the blood pouring from his head. One assailant tackled the squire over the rail of the boat. Kargin grabbed the rail and held on, fearing another trip into the cold river, while the goblin hit the water, not to be seen again. Tom, blood pouring from his ear wound, smashed the oar over the head of a goblin, snapping it in half. The goblin stumbled, and Kargin pulled himself back over the rail onto the deck again. The prince scrambled to his feet and rushed forward, pushing the goblin, sending it over the rail of the fishing boat and into the icy water. 2 were left. Both rushed the squire at the same time. Kargin kicked one, knocking it away for a moment, and finally had a chance to draw his longsword. He spun, slashing the other goblin across the belly, and then back again, slashing it across the face. The creature fell dead.
"Kill you! Kill you!"
The last remaining goblin yelled as it ran toward Kargin. The squire tried to duck, but the goblin saw the feint for what it was and brought its fist down hard onto the back of Kargin's head. Kargin hit the deck with a thud, dropped his sword, and felt wet, sticky blood pouring out of his chin. He reached for his dagger. The goblin kicked Kargin in the face, shattering his nose. Royal blood poured onto the deck. The would-be knight growled and drove his dagger down hard and through the top of the goblin's foot. The creature screamed and howled in pain. Kargin pushed himself up, tackling the goblin and shoving it off the boat and into the water below. He turned and took a fist directly into his already broken nose. Kargin hit the deck of the boat and turned over onto his knees to look up. Taum stood over him, broken oar aimed directly at Kargin's heart. Taum stared at the prince with hate and murder in his eyes. Kargin stared at the fish farmer. Kargin stared at the dead fish. They stared back at him. He stared at the image of his grandfather, Brom, emblazoned on the gold Tomath coins. Brom looked back. Kargin finally understood what had been happening. Killing royalty is a guaranteed visit to the headsman. Don't be a fool, Kargin said, swallowing hard and slowly standing to face Taum directly.
"My wife!"
Taum said, clenching his teeth in anger. Kargin looked at the spilled gold. Taum's gaze followed Kargin's to the gold. The prince kicked as hard as he could. Taum let out a strange yelp, and Kargin pulled his foot from between Taum's legs and kicked him hard in the groin a second time. The fish farmer dropped the broken oar and fell to the deck, holding himself in pain. "You thief! You're the one that stole the tax monies! You and your bitch wife and ugly little brat!" Kargin yelled, shocked at Taum's betrayal.
"Please!"
Taum said, holding up his hands and begging for mercy. Kargin grabbed his sword and aimed it at Taum's heart.
"Please! We didn't mean any harm. We needed this money. It's our only way to escape these cursed lands,"
Taum begged. "Cursed?" Kargin said. "These are Tomath lands, you scum! Lands of my namesake! Tell me why I shouldn't gut you here and now!"
"Look around you, man. Do you think this will be the last time these savages attack someone living on your lands? Your lands? We starve here while you and your damned royal bloodline ignore the plight of the very people who live on your land,"
Taum said. Kargin was stunned.
"Alamir, Medrath, even your own keep El-Jabbaroth,"
Taum spat. Kargin's fist tightened around the hilt of his longsword.
"Even towns across the north of the bay. So many have fallen so far, while all of you and your keep ignore us, all for the sake of building your damned army bigger and bigger. You ignore us, people like me, people like my wife, people like my son."
Kargin stared at Taum. Taum swallowed hard and prepared himself to be executed by the squire prince. Kargin looked at the blood-covered coins on the deck again. The image on the coins of his grandfather, Brom Tomath, stared at Kargin in disappointment.
"Please!"
Kargin stood for a very long moment in silence and squeezed the hilt of his sword. Taum prepared for the end. Kargin put the sword back in its scabbard. "Take me back to my horse. Keep the gold. This is my family's fault, not yours. If we can't protect the people who live on our lands from starvation, then who are we to expect gold from them? The kingdom shall always provide." Taum said nothing. He simply cried tears of relief and joy. Later that night, Kargin sat alone in a small patch of forest. His horse was tethered to a tree near the campfire. The pine wood burned hot and kept him warm enough. A crisp blanket of snow covered the ground, but the air didn't have quite the sting that it did the night before. It would be spring soon. The ordeal with Taum and the goblins had been a disaster, that much was certain. Kargin would return to his father and tell him the tale. He knew the king wouldn't be happy about the tax money, but he also knew his father's thoughts would be more preoccupied with the goblin menace growing stronger on Tomath lands. He and Taum had parted ways in Medrath without much more being said. Kargin had hoped Taum and his family would be able to find somewhere safer to live that wasn't experiencing the beginnings of famine like the Tomath lands were. Taum and his family were good people with good hearts. They didn't deserve the hell their lives had become. Kargin knew that when his time came, he would rule his lands in a way his father didn't. Kargin would put the people first. The sky was flooded with stars. The winter storm had passed. It would be spring soon, a time when he would enter knighthood, a time when he would serve the people of Tomath Keep, Gemaroth. Honor. Kargin smiled. He knew he had finally discovered it, or at least something close to it. His father wouldn't be impressed, but Kargin didn't care. The soon-to-be knight huddled under his wool blanket next to the warmth of the blaze and slept. He dreamt of Catherine.